more appropriate. But nevertheless, I'm going to get started. So today my talk is about, the title of my presentation was called The Pentecostal Question, African Religious Freedom or African Religious Bondage. And the reason why I decided to present on this particular topic is because I have been, for over the last, let's say, 25 to 30 years, maybe, traveling in and out of Africa. And there is an interesting phenomenon that I've witnessed over this evolutionary period from the time that I started, even to this summer where I spent a few weeks in Ghana. And what I noticed is the rise of Pentecostalism. Now, this is a topic that has been getting a lot of coverage by academics. So it's not that no one is talking about this particular topic. There are people who are vested in understanding the rise of the Pentecostal movement and Christianity within Africa. But I think that there are a couple of things that need to be kind of looked at and addressed. And I will talk about them in my presentation today. Now, one of the things that I'd like to do is just to offer this, that I'm not here to critique Christianity at all or religion at all. I happen to be a very spiritual person, and I am a believer of a higher power. So just to give you that background of where I'm coming from. I have a master's degree in theology from the University of Notre Dame, and my background is Catholic by baptism and catechism and all that kind of stuff as a young person. But I no longer really attend that many Catholic services unless I'm on the university campus or I've been invited, that sort of thing. So just to give you full disclosure, what my background is, I am a believer in a higher power. I just have a problem with organized religion as such. I also am a fairly adherent follower of Rastafari principles, because my mother, had a relationship with Ethiopia when we were really young, and so that her understanding of the Rastafari movement really sort of informed my own understanding of religion. So what I'm here to do today is not so much talk about the value of religion or Christianity or Pentecostalism or anything like that, but just try to kind of offer what I'm seeing as an academic and as a person who is a person who really does believe in this idea of African unity. Now, Pentecostalism, by and large, is one of the fastest growing, not the fastest growing, but one of the fastest growing denominations within religion today. And I'll go over some of the numbers here so we can have some kind of list of comparison um, uh, about that, about where Pentecostalism fits overall within Christianity and where Christianity fits at all within the scope of religions in general. But essentially, the Pentecostal movement was founded by a man by the name of Charles Parham. And Charles Parham was born in the late 19th century, and he associated this fundamental idea of speaking in tongues with baptism within the Holy Spirit, or baptism in the Holy Spirit. So he was predominantly the first preacher that we know of to articulate this sort of Pentecostal doctrine of evidential tongues and to really expand the movement. But what ended up happening is that there was an itinerant preacher, an African American itinerant preacher from Texas by the name of William J. Seymour, who was born in 1870 and he would eventually die in 1922. But what happened to the Pentecostal movement is that this African American man, William J. Seymour, moved from Texas to Los Angeles, and he set up residence on a street called Azusa. Now, this is just a nondescript street near downtown Los Angeles, and the way that downtown Los Angeles is spread, it has sort of engulfed Azusa Street. So I would say it's in the parameters of Los Angeles. And from about 1906 to 1915, William Seymour and his followers were largely responsible for the spreading of Pentecostalism throughout the United States. The movement that he started, we call it today the Azusa Street Revival. Now, this Azusa Street Revival attracted a lot of attention to institutions that were really interested in what was going on in this small, tiny house near downtown, where the Los Angeles Times, who sent reporters because there were estimated 300 or 400 people trying to pack themselves into a very small house to hear William Seymour's sermon. The other institution that was really interested in finding out what was going on was the Los Angeles Police Department. The Los Angeles Police Department actually arrested some of Seymour's followers because they believed that they were having some type of psychological breakdown when they were speaking in tongues and just basically evoking this idea of the Holy Spirit working through them. So the Los Angeles Times covered it. So we have these really interesting and fascinating articles, these sources that tell us what was going on in Seymour's church at the time period. Now, what ended up happening is that the message began to spread through a newspaper that Seymour created, and it spread throughout the United States. And there were people like Amy Semple McPherson who had ended up having a radio show that was broadcast live all over the country. And so, I'm sorry, you're saying you're losing clarity and unable to follow the conversation. I'm so sorry, and I apologize for that. I don't know what to do about that, so I do apologize. But what ended up happening here is that today Pentecostalism became a global Christian movement. There are over 700 denominations of Pentecostalism and about 279 to 300 million Pentecostals worldwide. You can find exceedingly large Pentecostal churches within North America, in the United States, which is a really big movement. Asia, Latin America, where Pentecostalism, I believe, is going to sort of overtake um, uh, Catholicism as the principal religion in Latin America. This is kind of what I believe. And I think that by the time we get to 2050, I believe that that will be primarily the case. But nevertheless, this Pentecostal movement, with all of its denominations, also includes a denomination that we call charismatic Christianity. And the only difference between charismatic Christianity and, say, Pentecostalism or the new form of Pentecostalism called neo-Pentecostalism is that charismatics simply just don't believe that speaking in tongues is necessary for evidence of spirit baptism. But we lump all Pentecostals together, charismatics, neo-Pentecostals, and Pentecostals all together, and that gives us the number of about 300 million Pentecostals worldwide. Now, where and how did Pentecostalism come to Africa? And it's very simple. It came to Africa through Seymour's newspaper that was called the Apostolic Faith newspaper. And it was brought to South Africa, actually to Cape Town, around 1908 or so. And from there, the movement just kind of spread throughout the country. So if you think about it, the power of Pentecostalism, or the power of Seymour's message, spread from a very small house in Los Angeles on a nondescript street and has led to the most significant mass church movement the world has seen since the founding of Islam. At least that's what I'm arguing, right? So I'm going to show you some numbers in terms of the Pentecostal movement within some countries within Africa. And so we'll be able to see quite quickly um, just how that message spread from um, the United States over into South Africa, and then from South Africa into the other parts of Africa. So let's take a look at some of the numbers. There are about, at least by 2050, there will be 1.1 billion Christians in the world by 2050. There are, in Africa, Pentecostals represent about 12% of the population. Now, today, that's not a very big number, but it's a growing number. So if we look at countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa, Ghana, uh, Congo, Zaire, Nigeria, Kenya, Angola, Uganda, they represent now about 20 to 25% of the Christian population. In Kenya, around 2006, a Pentecostal preacher by the name of T.D. Jakes. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of T.D. Jakes, but he is one of the world's leading Pentecostal preachers, where he preaches what we call the prosperity gospel, right? This intertwining of capitalism with religion. He came to Kenya around 2006, and it was picked up and written about by several newspapers and magazines, one specifically The Economist. They stated some data that 1 in 30 people in Kenya attended one of T.D. Jakes' sermons in Nairobi. That's an astronomical number. So you can see from this that the Pentecostal movement is sparking and has attracted a significant following in Africa that seems to be growing. Um, Not only that, there are some concerns that I also have with this rising number, right, throughout Africa, and that is going to be the disappearance of African folk religion. So while Islam is growing, Christianity is growing, the adherence to African folk religion is becoming less and less a feature in the spiritual lives of people within Africa, and that to me is somewhat problematic. Now, I'm going to read for you just a little bit of what The Economist magazine said about the rise of Pentecostalism within Kenya and um, T.D. Jakes' sermons that he gave over a series of days within Nairobi. Now, this is what The Economist, right, magazine, which is one of the world's leading magazines on capitalism, right, and economics. This is what they had to say about T.D. Jakes in Nairobi. The title of the article is called Hallelujah, the Rise of Pentecostalism Could Change the Face of Kenya. That's the title. Now, this is a quote about what they thought about T.D. Jakes. It is not a country, meaning Kenya, known for its enterprise, except when it comes to the business of selling God. Countless churches line Kenya's narrow, potholed roads, and particularly so in the damp highlands and the lush lowlands encircling Lake Victoria. Sundays in Kenya are busy. Even the most meager Nairobi slum pours out church elders in jacket and tie and little girls prim in white dresses and colored bows. So this is sort of what I would call somewhat a negative jab at the people of Kenya for attending these sermons. So this is what The Economist magazine thinks about T.D. Jakes and about Kenyans, or yeah, and then I would say this would be extended over to African, other Africans as well, about their following Pentecostalism. The magazine further went on to write this: Mr. Jakes does not hold back. He told Kenyans that Africa had small leaders because the people in Kenya have slave mentality. Kenyans have a duty, according to T.D. Jakes, to invest in themselves and in the market. And I imagine what he means by market is the capitalist market, and should allow America to help them do it. Mr. Jake's message of self empowerment, cribbed now by most aspiring Kenyan evangelists, may even make a political impact. Right? So there's a lot of stuff to unpack here with with that article, and one of them is that T.D. Jakes took a jab at the leaders of Kenya, calling them small leaders, and saying that the people of Kenya and the leaders themselves have a slave mentality, and the only way towards emancipation is through Pentecostalism, the church, and through the prosperity gospel. The economists also believe that the ramifications for this is that somewhere down the road that this may have some political ramifications, and I absolutely fundamentally agree with their assessment on that. Now, I stated earlier that there would be the growth of Pentecostalism and the growth of other religions, right? But I think what I like to do now is to kind of focus in on the effect. What does this sort of neo-Pentecostalism do, and how does it work? And there have been a number of scholars who kind of summed it up a lot better than I could. So I'm just going to tell you exactly what they thought about what the effects of Pentecostalism will be on the population. One of them is promoting just mere self-confidence, right? So that Pentecostalism, the idea of neo-Pentecostalism, will give people the idea to take control of their own mind. Right? It allows them to engage in rhetoric, right? And it's performance, right? Largely the Pentecostal movement, if you've ever seen preachers on stage, a lot of it is performative. And that strikes really at sort of the psychology. Um, so what this is going to do is, one, promote self-confidence, to foster rhetoric, right? Those skills of rhetorical skills and performance. And what it will eventually do was help people to engage in sort of this neo-capitalistic or neoliberal capitalistic sphere, right? And so when you combine all of those are somewhat of a deadly combination. And we can think of um, what happened in fascist Italy, right? That's one of the things that Mussolini promoted, right? Not the moving away from capitalism, but the embracing of capitalism, but also the embracing of somewhat of this psychological and repertoire, right? So, and I'm not suggesting that it's going to move in that way, but that's something that we have to kind of think about. Also, I think what Pentecostalism does, if there's a positive aspect to it, is that it does demonstrate at some level ethics, right? And these ethics do require engagement with social justice, and in some cases, peacemaking, and also with community development. Now, that's the positive. The downside to that is that the reason why the Pentecostal movement can, in fact, provide sort of right this idea of social justice, peacemaking, and community development is because many African states can't do that themselves. So the Pentecostal movement can have and has had in some instances the effect of supplanting the state. We see this in Brazil, right? And I'll talk about this a little bit later. But in Brazil, many of the gangs and the crime syndicates do for these communities, the favelas, what the state can't do for people that are exceedingly poor, like providing health care, right? And so who do the people owe their allegiance to? Do they owe their allegiance to the state, or do they owe their allegiance to these crime syndicates, right? And that's a fundamental problem. But nevertheless, the effects of this are something that really is able to take hold of these populations and have a fundamental positive and sometimes negative effect on its own population. Now, One of the features of Pentecostalism, and I think that we need to really think about here, is the idea that Pentecostalism presents a readily made, mobilized unit of mass. I've attended some Pentecostal churches within uh, Accra, and they are, even the smaller ones, are exceedingly large, and they have really dedicated followers, right? So they can do things like challenge, as I stated earlier, challenge corruption, force the state to have some type of accountability, instill efficiency in the national political body. Now, I wrote a paper in 2020 about rethinking the idea of Garveyism as a spiritual movement. And one of the things that I wrote about in this paper in 2020 was the idea of a thing called techniques of the body. It's a very Foucauldian idea that the idea of rituals are to change the body, change the psychology of the individual. And that's what Pentecostalism does, right? It necessarily changes one's psychology. And I think once the psychology changes, as T.D. Jakes is arguing, then we have this sort of ability, right, to sort of mobilize the masses for whatever movement, right, these churches want to foster, whether it's political or whether it's in community development or otherwise. Now, there are some things that we can consider here, and that is, one, how will Pentecostalism affect any effort at harnessing political power necessary for African liberation, right? Is there a ability to harness the Pentecostal movement, particularly in the next coming years, that can offer itself as a means for African unity and liberation? Are these Pentecostal institutions at all democratic? That's the question. But one of the churches that I attended in Accra this past summer, we were broke up into groups, and one of the things that they were discussing in one of the groups that I was in was that followers of the church had to be unquestioning of its leader, that they were not to question the authority of the church leader. So, is the institution of itself democratic or autocratic? Will Pentecostalism replace what we call in political science big man rule in Africa, right? So we have political leaders, right, who consider themselves to be big men. Will these Pentecostal leaders be able to supplant? And I'll talk about some of these churches in just a moment, but I will just give you just some ideas to think about here in terms of my thinking, in terms of how the Pentecostal movement can have some really serious negative effects on people um, within Africa. So, for example, the Pentecostal Christians within Nigeria are largely responsible, not all, but largely responsible for attacks on Muslims within that country. So we're not saying that all Christians are Pentecostal within who are, responsible for some of the violence, but there is enough evidence to suggest that Pentecostal Christians are in fact responsible for a lot of the violence towards Muslims in Nigeria. There were people like Efren Rios Montt, who was the de facto president of Guatemala from 1982 to 1983, who converted from Catholicism to Pentecostalism in 1976. And what Montt did is that every Sunday he got on television and he preached sermons. And some of these sermons were actually violent. When Montt eventually became de facto president, he led the military to destroyed over 600 Guatemalan villages and was responsible for the death of over 10,000 indigenous farmers. He was eventually brought up on war crimes trials, but he was never put in prison. But this is an exact demonstration of the power of the Pentecostal movement. Um, Today in Brazil, the Pentecostal movement is exceedingly moving towards a violent ethic. Under Bolsonaro, Pentecostal gangs, or the gangs that they call bandits of Jesus, right? So these bandits of Jesus have stepped up their war against African indigenous religion. One of the largest crime syndicates is called the Pure Third Command, if I got that right, um, has been destroying African Brazilian meeting houses throughout favelas in Brazil. Um, and so when you look at the numbers, 80% of Pentecostals actually supported Bolsonaro, like 80%. And if we can think about also organizations within Africa, like the Lord's Resistance Army. Now, the Lord's Resistance Army was Christian extremists. Some people have not categorized them as Pentecostal, but we can't forget about their operations in northern Uganda, right? Where Joseph Kony, during the Ugandan Civil War, was responsible for mass slaughters of people. So this is something at all to think about. Now, when I was in Ghana, I'm going to just hold up a little bit. I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I'm going to hold up this book that I received from one of the churches. And this book is called Our Daily Bread. And what I just wanted to focus in on is this symbol here. And if you can't see this very well, it's two M16 rifles that are crossed. And of course, there is the biblical cross here with two M16 rifles. Now, with this book that I was given, and you can see it's in camouflage, right? So you can understand where it's coming from. Now, I haven't read this book. I haven't popped it open. I was handed this book. And if you turn over onto the back side of the book, it's got a vision. And I'm just going to read to you what the vision is. This is from a Pentecostal church. For every person in the armed forces, all security services, civilian employees and families and friends of the security services of Ghana to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. The mission is to assist the development of Christian leaders in the armed forces, all security services, civilian employees, families and friends of all security services in Ghana, and in the establishment and growth of military Christian fellowship. So essentially, what this book is doing is it's trying to harness the power of the military around Pentecostalism. Now, here in the United States, unlike many countries, we like to argue that we have a clear separation of church and state, and we know what the effects are of the Pentecostal movement within the United States, right? Donald Trump, for example, was largely put into office by Christians, and 90% of Pentecostals in the United States follow or are supporters of Donald Trump. Now, we can think about this in terms of, again, relative numbers, and we note that in, let's say, in Nigeria, I think, out of the the seven largest churches within Africa are located in Nigeria, and some of them have over 65,000 members. Right? I think the Deeper Christian Life Missionary in Lagos has about 65,000 followers. That's an awful number, a large number. So if you combine that, let's say, with the military, then you have these abject strength numbers, right, that pose a significant problem or could pose a significant problem to African unity. And so that is a particular problem. So this is some of the things that I wanted to offer today for us to think about is the rise of Pentecostalism from a nascent following of about 300 people to a global phenomenon where there are over 300 million followers and the rise of Pentecostalism within Africa. Like I said, by the time we get to 2050, Pentecostalism will be a driving significant force in the spiritual life of people on the continent. And I think that that will have ramifications for the political life or in terms of whether or not there's a chance to unify Africa in the future, particularly if we're thinking about different forms of economic systems beyond capitalism. This might be a somewhat fundamental problem. Okay, so that ends my talk today, and I'll just look through the chat here and see if there are any questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to chime in. So Bolt M says, do we know if the violence is facilitated by imperialism to displace people from areas and keeping neo-colonialism going? Now, my description of T.D. Jakes, who was stating in Kenya um, that Kenya has small leaders, that people in Kenya have slave mentality, and that the only way forward is through market systems. And what he means is through capitalism. I don't think T.D. Jakes understands this idea of imperialism. I don't think he's come to Kenya and actually recognizes what he's doing is bringing an imperialist message to the masses. I don't think he understands that. He's an educated man, but how well educated he is, I'm not quite sure. I don't think he really understands that. But to me, the effect is there, right? When Kenyans were hearing this message, what they were hearing is that the system is not affording us economic opportunity, and maybe through the prosperity gospel, we can find these opportunities. Okay, so maybe another question is Pentecostalism in hospitals? I think is that the question? Maybe you want to rewrite that. All right. So let's see this question. I don't quite understand the question here. No, tobacco. I don't understand the question. So maybe you want to rephrase the question. So if there are there any other questions anybody has at all? Why do you believe we praise the religion given to us by our enemies? It's uh, colonialism and slavery. Simple as that. Slavery was a powerful force on stripping Africans of their heritage, their religion, their livelihood, their understanding. Right, the idea of slavery introducing a social death for those who were enslaved is one. Colonialism, to me, was just as and probably more pernicious than slavery, because under colonialism there was a more of a modicum of freedom. Right, you could believe that as long as you believed in the empire and you accepted the empire, that you would be bestowed all of these rights of the empire. So it may have been a lot more insidious than slavery. And these two primary effects, right, getting a person to become deprogrammed is a very difficult thing. And we see countries of the world, right? So all of Europe, the United States, Canada, the Western world is largely Christian, and we fundamentally believe that these nations probably owe, in some ways, their prosperity through Christianity. Right? So That is a fundamental problem. We are just mimicking what we see. What role does religious extremism play in regard to groups in Africa using their own ends, and is in the West interest to support it? Like I said, Joseph Kono in the Lord's Resistance Army is an example of this religious extremism playing itself out. Now, the Kono, I don't believe, had a very large following. I don't think he had more than 300 or 400 followers, but these were armed followers, right? And they're largely young. And so, if you think about it, how in the United States Donald Trump was largely supported and put into office by Pentecostals. And if you look at many black people who supported Donald Trump, there's not a lot, but if you look at the few black people that did support Donald Trump, they all happen to be Pentecostals, right? They don't believe in abortion. They don't believe in contraception, which are things that in the United States had always been given, right? They fundamentally believe that everything should be Christ-centered, which was an anathema to the U.S. Constitution, where we had this division between church and state. So if Donald Trump is nothing more than what I think he's a harbinger of things to come in Africa, and all it requires is one of these ministers of these very large Pentecostal churches to run for office under the message of Pentecostalism, and Africans will experience, I'm not sure which country, but Africans will experience the same thing that we've experienced here in the United States. What I got from the presentation is that colonists have introduced to us and through their religions were the only belief systems opposing them to the church and the military. Anywhere people met in large numbers, I'm not a believer in want to see it return to African belief systems. Are these being taught anywhere in, laboratory? In the United States, there was a small but growing movement of people who were going back to these African indigenous religions. For example, Beyonce is a follower of Ifa. And so you do have that in the United States, but not in Africa. We're seeing the opposite. Christianity is rising in Africa, and folk religions are being diminished within Africa, and they're being attacked in places like Brazil. So I believe that these African religious systems, the indigenous religion systems, are liberating. Right? They are the very thing I think that Africans need for true liberation, getting back to the roots, so to speak. But we're not seeing that in terms of the numbers. That's the problem. The numbers speak otherwise. Okay, I think that are we just about out of time? I think we have about 5 more minutes. Down 4 minutes. So maybe I just expound on that just a little bit more. Okay, you say, I live in the UK where the Pentecostal church is probably the most popular among Africans. I understand the situation may be similar in the US. Black liberation theology is expressed in the church. So do you see a disparity in how it manifests on the continent and the diaspora? I'm not sure what you mean by the disparity. Can you just clarify what you mean by the disparity? But yeah, the Pentecostal movement is the biggest church movement for Black people in the United States. We have African Methodist Episcopal churches, which used to be the largest churches in the United States, Black churches. But the Pentecostal churches are largely overtaking the AME church. And I believe that there's the same situation in the UK as well. And so here is the thing that thank you for that, Gabriel. But this is the thing that I would just like to say in closing for the Black liberation theology. The Black liberation theology, as its heart, without people like Albert Cleage and others, when they espoused it, the whole fundamental idea of Black liberation theology was to liberate the minds of Black people. That was the fundamental for us. And what it ended up doing, being the Black liberation theology has been overtaken by this prosperity gospel movement. Black people no longer want liberation from the United States. They want liberation in the United States. And so what I mean by that is that they want all the good things that come with living in the United States, right? The ability to gain wealth and all of that. But they are not leaving here in the significant numbers that we would have thought would have we would have thought over the years, right, with segregation, racism, and all of that kind of stuff, right? So I think what the prosperity gospel does is that it leads people down a rabbit hole. They're chasing capitalist dreams, and we know what those outcomes are. Capitalism, right, benefit, white male white males in Europe and in the United States. It's designed to do that. And it's not designed to benefit but a handful of people who may get lucky, right? If you can dribble a basketball or you can play soccer or football, right, or soccer well, then you might have an opportunity. But outside of that, it's limited number. So disparity in terms of politicization. Um, yeah, what I fundamentally believe what's going to happen in Africa is what happened here in the United States is that politics will eventually seep into the churches within Africa. They will become political institutions as they are here in the United States. If you look at the United States Supreme Court, almost all of the members of the United States Supreme Court are Catholic. And that was done by design, right? To make sure that people who are believe in, let's say, socialist ideas, and if there are any court cases that come before the Supreme Court, that they would be challenged by the Supreme Court members who believe in this sort of neo-Christian, orthodox, capitalist society. That the Supreme Court has been, those members of the Supreme Court have been put on the bench to support the overall system. Black theology played an important role in Azania in the 70s, whereby some members of the Black consciousness were trained in priests in our communities, experienced isolate from the nation and diminish their impact. Yeah, I fundamentally agree. The Black theology of the 1970s is nothing like the Black theology today. So we have two fundamentally different viewpoints and advantage points to look at theology today than we did from the 1970s. Two entirely different churches and worldview. Okay, so it's 7:15. I thank everyone for attending today. I know that it's an hour or so out of your time, so I do appreciate it. I put my email address in the chat, so if you want those slides, then you can send me an email message, and I'd be happy to send those out to you. But I appreciate your patience and your time with the video and all of that. It just didn't work out properly, but I do appreciate everyone. Blessings and hotep to you all. Have a good day and good time.